Welcome back to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. Our focus this morning is on the race for Milwaukee County Executive that's coming up in the spring election on Tuesday, April 5th. I just spoke with incumbent Milwaukee County Executive Chris Larson, and we're now being joined by his opponent, State Senator Chris Larson. Chris Larson was born and raised in Milwaukee County, and in 2008 he successfully ran for Milwaukee County Supervisor, and in 2010 was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for being here.
Okay.
And I briefly mentioned a few of your political accomplishments. Why is it important for you to be the next Milwaukee County Executive?
I think it's important to have a community voice in our county's highest office, somebody who was born here, raised here, lived here his whole life, and somebody who's spent his career fighting for working families. That's what I've done, and it's unfortunately, when you don't have that, when you have somebody like the current county executive who doesn't look out for our neighbors, isn't thinking of them, has used everything that he can to try and consolidate more power for himself and work around the public, where he's trying to cut them out from the public process and the public debate, and giving more power to himself. And I think that's dangerous for any office, particularly for the highest office in Milwaukee County.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because he was just here and he said that his whole concept when dealing with politics is to approach it and have no partisanship involved, but do what's best for the people. So you don't feel that that's what he's done for the last 5 years?
No, I think he is definitely, when he's had the chance to get more power, he has done so, right? And when he's had a chance to cut out the public, he's done so. Now, he did that when he asked for the unilateral land authority, where he doesn't have to go over with the county board when he sells county land, which includes the airport, the zoo, the museum, and includes 43 parks, which we found out about, includes thousands of other acres that are now vulnerable for sale without public approval or without county board input. He did that, working behind the scenes, and I don't think that's that might not be partisan, but that's something that's bad for the public, and he's done that. He's also looked for unilateral policy-making authority, and he's also looked for nearly unilateral budgeting authority, and I don't think that's right. It doesn't matter the partisan, what it is behind it, but I think that whenever he's had the chance to get power, he's done it. And when he's had the chance to do something for the public, like get more funding for transit or be able to improve our parks, he has not done that. It's only when he's working bipartisan that it actually benefits him or his office, not the public.
Wow. So last month, you narrowly edged Chris Larson in the four-way primary, beating him by more than 700 votes. The two of you actually have two very different approaches of how you would like to run the county. Yeah. So you've already spoken on the things that you think he's not doing or has not done in the past 5 years that he's been in office. Let's start off talking about your desire to push for an increase in the sales tax by a penny in Milwaukee County.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that passed in 2008. We put it to referendum, and what it does is it provides a 1% increase in the sales tax for Milwaukee County, and the first half goes to pay down property taxes. So property taxes would actually be reduced. The additional 0.5% will go towards dedicated funding for parks, transit, emergency medical services, public safety. Those things are dwindling. We lose funds for those every year. I think people see it in the parks. You can look at the domes where there has not been the dedicated funding to make sure that we're planning ahead with those. People's favorite parks have seen damage. The transit system, we continue to be one of the highest bus fares in the entire country. So that's what the sales tax would provide. And the reason a sales tax makes sense is it shifts it off of property taxes. 1/3 of the funds that come in for a sales tax comes from folks outside of Milwaukee County. So they can start sharing or paying into the system where they benefit from it when they're here in town. And some people do say that it is regressive, so I'm happy to address that. I looked into it, and the fact is that if you think like a person who's in poverty, a person who's struggling, most things in Wisconsin are sales tax exempt that a person would be spending their money on. Rent is not subject to a sales tax. Gasoline, medicine, medical services, groceries are all not subject to a sales tax. And those would be the same people who stand to benefit the most.
Okay.
which is why I think it makes sense. It's an honest approach, and I think most people appreciate that.
And you would hope that this would generate $141 million?
That's the estimate. Yeah, that's the estimate of based off of what the sales tax revenue is currently. Yeah.
And I find it interesting because being someone that works in the media and has my whole career, I've lived in several places across the country, and I do believe that Wisconsin, or specifically Milwaukee County, has some of the highest property taxes I've ever paid in my life. So is there a possibility, if elected, that you would be focused on lowering those property taxes?
Yeah, if we can shift it over to a sales tax, then half of it would go to, you cited the $140, $70 million would go towards property tax relief immediately once we pass this. And because otherwise there's only a handful of tools that are available to local governments, and sales tax, or sorry, the property tax is where everybody leans. And so property owners are the ones that have to pay into the share way more than they would in other parts of the country.
That's so true.
Sales tax on the other side, we have one of the lowest sales taxes in the country, right? If you go over to Minneapolis, it's 8.5%. If you go down to Chicago, it's over 10% down there.
Wow.
So I think it makes sense. And again, because people help pay for it from outside the county, I think it makes sense to share the load a little bit.
And so you've shared with us your ideas on that. Chris Abley, on the other hand, says his goal is to hold the line on property taxes over the next 4 years. So it's just an interesting contrast. And like I said, you both have very different ideas on how to approach the business of the county. So
he hasn't done that, though. I mean, just to be clear, he says we're gonna freeze property taxes. Property taxes have gone up under Chris Abley. That's just a fact, and you can ask him that directly, and he'll have to admit, property taxes have gone up, and they've actually gone up at a faster rate than they have in the city of Milwaukee over the same time period. So I think what he has done is he's continued the same dishonest budget gimmicks that Scott Walker has, right? And I think that's the problem. Is people are done with the gimmicks, they're done with the games, they're done with the Scott Walker style politics.
Wow. So I say wow because every time I get into these political conversations, I'm always very intrigued by the information that I gather, because sometimes in everyday life we get the headlines, we read the newspaper, but we really don't get a chance to talk to the individuals who are in office one-on-one to really get a full understanding of their thoughts. So excuse me if I keep saying wow.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Am.
Look, and I'm somebody who is out there in the public as much as possible. That was our first pledge, is we're going to be out there in every municipality every single year doing public listening sessions. And I've done that to a great degree as a state senator, did it as a county supervisor, and I think it's about time people have a public servant who is out there in the public.
All righty. And so you did mention the Mitchell Park domes, and that has become a major focus in this particular campaign for Milwaukee County Executive. The domes, needless to say, are in need of some major repairs. They're 50 years old. How would you like to see things handled? Abley was just sitting where you are and said that he is in favor of, just like the Victorian Conservatory it was time to replace that. He sees that it may be time to replace the domes as we know them and maybe go with something more efficient, et cetera, where we're not like losing money, but saving money. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first, I don't know where to start on this, right? One, I think the first thing is, as somebody who was born here, raised here, I've lived here my whole life, and I think of the fact that, look, the domes are a place it's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, right? It's a place where we went as kids. It's a place where I take my kids in winter, and we were bummed when it was closed this winter and closed indefinitely. That was concerning, and I think that there was steps that could be taken and to make sure that we keep the domes open and keep them preserved. I'm committed to keeping the domes, of making sure that we have them. They're unique to Milwaukee. It's a unique thing, and I want to make sure that the next generation has that legacy. I'm glad that Chris Abley has moved to a point where he is starting to talk about rebuilding or doing something there, because early on he was citing inflated estimates for what it would cost in order to fix these.
Is that the $75 million?
Right. That's an estimate. I've talked to a number of people who used to be with the Parks Department and have since left under Abley, and they've said, nope, that's way high. Right?
You're estimating about $45 million to do some major repairs.
Right.
I had talked about this, and I kind of think of it as a house with really bad windows. So what would you do if you were to keep the domes intact about the fact that they're not really energy efficient in a climate like ours?
Yeah, well, I think I'd have to work with the park experts and be able to do that. Right now, it's me, it's my campaign, it's the people who feed me information. But But I think once we get in there, we'll do a full assessment and see. But the people who I trust, people who've worked in the parks for decades, are saying, look, we could do it for $15 million per dome on a rebuild. And I think that's something that, look, it makes sense. It's a regional asset, so we'd seek regional funding, we'd seek state funding, we'd seek federal funding to make sure we rebuild these.
Okay.
And I'd say this, I think it's great that Chris Avely is suddenly finding religion and listening to the public and going out there with us. You know, to be clear, when the Bucks Arena deal rolled around, like he worked behind closed doors and he obligated us to $80 million without a clue on to how we were going to pay for it. He had a patchy deal on how he was going to do that. He deliberately cut out the public from even the $1 land deal that happened in the Park East, right? So I think it's good now in an election year, he's trying to figure out that I'm going to go to the public, I'm going to listen to people on this. But just to be clear, he does that during election years, but we know what happens immediately afterwards.
All right, and what I'd like to do, we're quickly running out of time. I think it's important to find out, if you were elected as Milwaukee County Executive, what would be one of your priorities when it comes to doing what's best, in your opinion, for Milwaukee County?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, right? I think the important thing is we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm trying to think of what we haven't covered. I guess the big one is making sure that you have somebody in the highest office looking out for working families. So that includes, when we're spending money on economic development, we are looking out for living wage jobs and making sure living wage jobs happen as a result of it. And they're targeted at folks who live in our community who are in need of jobs the most. That would be one of the priorities that we didn't cover. But yeah, I mean, listening to the public listening sessions, making sure everyone's part of this conversation.
It's all very important. You're absolutely right. And I'm scared to bring this up because we're so close to wrapping up, but wanted to talk about that shortage of deputies. It's important. I served jury duty not too long ago, and we were sitting around forever because there weren't enough deputies. There hasn't been a great working position between Sheriff Clark and Avely over the years, needless to say. All I want you to tell me is, do you see a better working relationship in the future if elected with the sheriff?
That's a tough one.
Doesn't happen for a lot of people.
I don't know if we'll be tailgating anytime soon, but I can tell you, look, there are priorities that we match up. One of them is that I want to address drunk driving in a meaningful way. That is the role of the sheriff's department. I do want to make sure that, you know, that personal feuds aren't getting in the way of budgeting. It seems that that's happened. I do want to make sure that we have deputies that are making sure that they can serve us in an increased public safety. That hasn't happened. I mean, these guys and gals are having to work double shifts. They're having to work overtime, and it's not making people safe. So it's not efficient.
Thank you for coming by and sharing the time and all the information with us today. Best of luck to you.
You bet. Thanks.
State Senator Chris Larson is a candidate for Milwaukee County Executive. Keep in mind, the general election is on Tuesday, April 5th. And for more information on his campaign and where he stands on the issues, you can log on to voteforlarson.com. That's going to do it for today's show. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you join us again next week as we take another look at our issues, Milwaukee. Have a great day.